To believe the earth is flat, you either have to be insane, stupid, brainwashed, ignorant, or lying. Okay, Duffy, what would it take for you to believe that it's not 10,000 years old? What would the final experiment look like for Duffy? And like, there she lusted after her lovers, whose genitals were like those of donkeys and whose emissions were like that of horses.
Nice.
I actually know that that is from the Bible.
What?
So this is why the Bible should be banned in schools, because the Bible is porn.
YouAreMopped. Who fucking names their channel that?
What's up, everyone? I'm back, and today I'm joined by author and YouTuber Eric Peterson from the YouTube channel Planet Peterson. Eric, I've really been looking forward to this. Thanks for coming on.
You're very welcome. It's cool to meet fans.
Hey, quick reminder that if you enjoy these kinds of conversations and want to see more like this, please let me know by giving this video a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss future interviews with other awesome content creators. Also, shout out to Planet Peterson. His videos are this perfect combination of informative and entertaining, and you should definitely check out his channel. Links in the description. That's it. Thanks.
And now back to your regularly scheduled program.
We've got a lot to cover. Hopefully we can get to everything. I'll throw up a list of topics and timestamps for the viewers on screen, just in case they want to jump around. But I actually have recently read both of your published books. I've read them both within this past week. They're such good and easy reads. I did start with your latest one, Facts That Aren't True. Congratulations on such a perfect title, by the way.
Thanks.
All right, to begin, maybe you could tell us a little bit about the format and what kind of untrue facts you discuss in the book.
Yeah, Facts That Aren't True started off as a series of TikTok videos I was making. As a longtime teacher, this idea of dispelling commonly held myths, and that's what Facts That Aren't True are. Things that everybody says but aren't true, like the North Star is the brightest star in the sky. You can see the Great Wall of China from space. Tons and tons of things like that. That's how it started off. And then in making these videos that were only supposed to be 1 or 2 minutes long, for some of these claims, I started to realize there's actually a really fascinating history behind this. I start off on one claim about how the typical American breakfast was literally just a marketing scheme, and it ends with the United States overthrowing the government in Guatemala. And it's like, there are so many crazy stories like that. And so I started to just think to myself, I should put this into a book. I had already written one at that point in my life or my career, whatever that means. And so I thought that this would be a really interesting book. It's a book that you can read backwards, inside out. It's not a chapter book. It doesn't tell a story. It tells 120-ish mini stories that are just, you can pick it up and start at whatever point you want. So yeah, the book is just, it begins with, it's a little bit confusing because it begins, the heading of a part is something that's not true, but it's given as a declarative statement. Humans only use 10% of our brains. That's a fact that isn't true. And then I explain how it isn't, how we know it isn't, the story behind it, maybe the origins of the claim, if there is a grain of truth to it, what that might be.
Yeah, it was brilliant. Actually, it is my wife's new favorite book. It is right up her alley with the fact that you can sit down, turn to a random page, find a headline, as you said, and then read 2 or 3 pages of information. And the thing with me was that I was already familiar with many of these, but still, I did learn a lot about them because you go into such detail about how they came about and things like that. Was there any facts that you discovered that you were genuinely surprised by?
Yeah, well, for the most part, these claims in the book were things that I had heard before. I used AI to help me generate a list. It didn't help me write the book, but I had probably in the back of my head about 50 things that I just had heard a million times before, had read in other books talking about that they're not true, questions and comments that commonly come up, as a teacher and things like that. And then I generated a bigger list with AI and I went through, I was like, I've heard of that, I've heard of that, I've heard of that before. Oh, okay. That one's a little bit interesting. So that helped me get, a few of them. But yeah, that's a really good question. Because like I said, most of these were things I kind of already knew, but you'd be amazed at how much you learn writing a book. So one thing that I never planned on putting in the book were some of the claims centered around the Bible. And it wasn't because I didn't want to make the book controversial or because I didn't want to go there or anything like that. But I actually learned that these things aren't true. So one of them in there is that the idea that Christian holidays are literally just stolen pagan traditions. Now, without getting too much into the weeds about the history behind this, it's really not true. There has been borrowing of ideas from other pagan holidays, traditions, rituals, etc. into Christianity, but the myth is sort of this conspiracy that the church was sitting around thinking, how can we get pagan converts? Oh, I know, we'll just steal their religion and adopt it into ours. That is not what happened. What almost certainly did happen was pagan converts naturally brought in some of their own traditions into Christianity, but there are actually very few of those. Decking the halls and Yule logs are really the only ones that we can say for certain. If you go online, you will find and look, I debate against religion all the time. It's a huge thing that I do. I have no interest in these claims not being true. It would be a slightly more convenient if they were true, but I care about the truth, which is why I speak out against a lot of religious ideas. So, I had heard this mantra that, Jesus is just Horus retold. That is completely bogus. And the thing about stealing traditions, it really didn't happen that way. Now, there are plenty of overlaps. I talk about those in the book. But that was something I never planned on throwing into the book, and was something I kind of sort of believed some of those claims until I started researching it, and I'm happy that I know better now. Another interesting one along that same theme is this claim that Constantine made the Roman Empire Christian. He didn't. He was the first Christian emperor, and I believe he had some edicts, which are sort of like executive orders, where he ordered that pagan temples, like Christian churches that had been turned into pagan temples, I think he ordered them returned back. There was something about churches being reconverted, I believe it was. But he didn't make Christianity the official religion, and I think it was either him or his his successor actually. One of them made it so that Christianity is no longer illegal. Kind of a weird deal that it was illegal for a long time. And then later on, it was much later on that it was made the official religion of the Roman Empire. And there's also this big myth that I've even heard Christians perpetuate this myth that Constantine convened a convention where they decided which books counted as canon and which don't. And that's the Council of Nicaea. And the Council of Nicaea happened, but they didn't do anything like that at that convention or council or whatever.
It's funny. I've actually just heard you say that in a debate against a Christian. I don't know if it was a recent debate. It was recent to me because I just watched it. But I thought you were going to mention the three wise men.
It's kind of funny, and I try to make the reader understand this because, again, it's like I'm not trying to be controversial in any way. This book does not support atheism. I wouldn't say really in much of a way. But the point is, according to the Bible, Adam and Eve didn't eat an apple. And that's the important part. And it's the same thing. I talk about Goliath in there. Like, no, he was not 10 feet tall. And you don't have to take my word for it, telling you that the odds of that being true are less or are greater than 1 over the number of atoms in the universe. You don't even have to take my word for that. Literally, our oldest copies of the Hebrew Bible say that he wasn't. So according to the holy text, he was not that tall.
7 foot would have been outrageously tall. Like, he could have been 6'5", and that would have been a giant.
That would put him in the realm of possibly the tallest human on the planet. But that story is another really fascinating example of how we begin somewhere, and then by looking at the data, it takes us to somewhere that you absolutely wouldn't expect, which is in that specific part about Goliath being a giant. There's this huge tangent because in researching that, I learned that humans are actually getting shorter. And it's like, I thought life expectancy and human height, I would have never expected that. I had no idea. I had no idea. But yeah, humanity reached peak height in about 1980, and we've been getting shorter ever since.
I do want to maybe even pick a fight with this one. I think you were kind of on my side, but we might disagree here. The basketball shooters go on hot streaks. Now, I've heard it. I've heard of this one. I'm very familiar with it. The hot hand fallacy.
Yes.
And you went back and forth in your description of it. You talked about this study says this, and followed by that study which disagreed, and then there was a third, more comprehensive study. I forget where you landed on this. Do you think there is such thing as a hot hand in basketball?
I don't. So I officially don't. So initially, and like for the viewer, if you don't know what we're talking about, so the idea is if a basketball shooter has made like 5 consecutive shots in a row, is there something statistically significant there? Or in other words, should they have the last shot in the game if you have like 3 seconds left and you need a last second heave? Or are they more likely to perhaps regress to the mean, which would technically be a gambler's fallacy in this particular example? Or are they less likely or more likely to regress to the mean? And should you pass the ball to some other shooter? So this initial study was looked at by a guy who was a Nobel Prize winner in economics, and he won his Nobel Prize by studying cognitive biases. So they did a study where they looked at the Philadelphia 76ers, and there was a college team, and I think it might have been the Celtics. There was another professional team. But they just analyzed a series of shots that all the players had made, and they tried to look at after a player had made between 2 and 3 makes, was there a statistically significant increase in the likelihood that their next shot will go in? And they came away from that concluding, no, there is not. Then there was a subsequent... So I had known about that for a long time because I'd read some of Daniel Kahneman's books. And Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky... I'm not sure if Kahneman was involved in the original study, but I know Tversky was. But anyways, I'd known about that. But then I read a subsequent study because I was putting this into the book, and then I was doing research on it because there were several things that were going to get into the book that when I dug deeper into them, I learned, well, I can't include this because it's actually, I can't declare that this is true, false, one way or the other. But anyways, I learned of a study that looked at the original study and claimed, you guys are violating, or you fell for the law of small numbers. So, which I talk about earlier in the book, but the law of small numbers basically says when you have small data sets, it's pretty easy to draw erroneous conclusions. We would call this a hasty generalization. So I think the example I give in the book is, this is not an original example. I read Daniel Kahneman gave this example. If you look at rural America, you can find places in rural America where people live longer and there isn't as much diabetes and there isn't as much heart disease and cancer. And you can walk away from that saying, yes, of course, because they don't live in urban environments where there's all this industrial pollution and there's a lot less stress involved, and perhaps they're eating more locally. And so, of course, you would expect longer lifespans. But then you can also find studies in rural America that find the exact opposite of everything I said. And people draw conclusions from that saying, oh, well, yeah, that's because they eat a lot of processed frozen food because and like I literally grew up this way, because when you live an hour from the nearest big town, you just have to buy groceries in bulk, for example. Or like the lack of access to sophisticated healthcare in rural America leads to this. So with small data sets, you can come to, contradictory conclusions, which means the data is not complete or good enough. So they thought that Tversky had fallen for that because when they looked at the data, they found that there actually may be some statistical significance to this. And so I was really pissed that I spent a whole day researching and writing and thought I might have to throw it away. But then I found another study. I originally learned about it from the YouTube channel Numberphile, and they ran a very sophisticated, what's called a permutation test on historically one of the greatest shooting teams of all time, the 2016-17 Golden State Warriors. And they found absolutely no significance. I mean, there was that game where Klay Thompson scored 60 points or 60 something points. And I mean, he only missed a tiny handful of shots. He shot like 80% for the game. So if anybody would have and that they didn't just analyze one game, they analyzed 3 players for the entire season. And it was Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Kevin Durant. I mean, 3 of the 5 best shooters in history. So if there was evidence of hotness or whatever, it was going to be found there. And they found absolutely none. And so I basically trust that data. So I do think that the hot hand fallacy, it is real. I think it is a fallacy, but I don't want to get into this too much because you got to buy the book. But the danger here is falling for a gambler's fallacy in rejecting the hot hand fallacy. So just because you've made 5 in a row doesn't mean you're due for a miss. That's a gambler's fallacy, but we'll leave it there.
Again, I could spend all night talking to you about that book, but let's talk about your previous book, which only came out about a year before this one. So Facts That Aren't True just came out, a few months ago, and a little over a year ago was your first book, Rational Answers to Stupid Questions, which I have recently read. Actually, I haven't quite finished reading it. It's another one where you can kind of skip around a little bit. There are multiple parts to it, but why don't you explain for the viewers what this book was all about?
Yeah, Facts That Aren't True and Rational Answers to Stupid Questions are structured almost identically because it's a series of, there's about 89 false claims in Rational Answers to Stupid Questions. But yeah, it begins with a claim that isn't true, but they're not widely believed so much apart from the evolution things, like the facts that aren't true you find in that book. So Rational Answers to Stupid Questions started off in late 2022. No, not late 2022, because it came out in, it would have been late 2022. I'd been debating flat earthers and evolution deniers and Big Bang deniers and young Earth creationists and whatever for 2.5 years, something like that. And I remember I created a post and I just said, should I just write a book about that's just a compilation of all the dumb things I've heard over the years? And I don't know, I'll call it Rational Answers to Stupid Questions or something like that. And so many people said, yeah, you should do that. And I had always wanted to write a book. I just didn't really know what it would ever be about. And this just really, I knew that I knew I'd just be able to write page after page after page of this thing. The book's about 67,000 words long, which is a pretty decent, like average sized book, I suppose. But yeah, so I just compiled all of I sat down for a long time thinking of in each like category, subcategory of science that I typically look at, what are the things that people commonly say? And I would even, as I was developing the book, I would be having discussions or debates with people online, and they'd say something, I'd be like, oh yeah, that's going in the book. Let me write that down real quick over here. So yeah, that's the concept for the book and how it came to be. And yeah, like I said, it's about 89 of these claims. It covers evolution, the Big Bang, science in general, young Earth creationism, and the flat Earth in there.
You are super familiar with these. As you said, these are essentially a list of topics that you and others in the online community often debate. Do you have a favorite of that list, a favorite topic to either debate, defend, or discuss?
Oh, I like talking about evolution the most because that subject just fascinates me. Ever since I was a little kid, I just love it. I don't know when I started like thinking, accepting, understanding evolution. I don't really remember when that was, but learning about nature and animals and all that ever since I was very little really fascinated me. So evolution extends to, it extends to microbial life and even plants as well, which I know less about, but it's right up my alley. It's what I find interesting, and it's literally a theory about all of life. And the other thing about evolution that's, as I've gotten older, that is so important to me is I am actually really kind of a fan of, I guess I would call it evolutionary psychology. And this started before I started doing debates, but I really got fascinated in sort of the political and group psychology aspect of why do people think the way that they think? Because it's really peculiar to me that you can get millions of people all believing in some complete nonsense, whether it's falling for the lies of a politician or just rejecting scientific facts in favor of something goofy, or just the way that we all kind of collectively as humans have these sorts of innate biases and how they guide and influence our judgment. I find that really fascinating, and all the research I've read on it really only makes sense in light of our evolutionary history. Because you think about, when we were, hundreds of thousands of years ago, or even millions of years ago before we existed, what was shaping the brains of our ancestors? And how do we see that same kind of thing today? That's an extremely important piece to that.
The first chapter I read was the last chapter, which is on flat Earth.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
I've asked this question to Simon Dan. It was actually my first question to him, and I want to put it to you. Are flat earthers stupid?
Some are, yeah. I have found out that an incredible number of them just cannot think. They can't do it. There's this sort of there's like a meme culture. There are inside jokes within my channel or whatever, Planet Peterson. So if you watch some of my videos, or if you watch a lot of them at least, you'll see like there are a lot of comments or comment themes that keep repeating. And one of them you might see is people saying, yeah, but can you put that into a logical syllogism? Because I was debating this group of flat earthers one time, and one of them was doing most of the talking. And I said, it was after the final experiment happened, and I said, did you guys see that the sun rose in the southeast when they were in Buenos Aires in Chile or wherever that was? And they're like, yeah, so what? And I said, well, this is a devastating problem for flat Earth. And the guy unironically said, is it? Can you put that in a logical syllogism for me? And I was like, what would that prove? And
I literally just listened to that actual
it's
conversation today.
Well, that's not the stupid part yet. The stupid part is now it's dumb thinking that would prove anything. So there is we have a symptom of stupidity here, but we don't quite yet have a diagnosis. The diagnosis came later, where I said to the guy, could you give me your position as a syllogism? And he said, I go outside, it looks flat, therefore it is flat. And I lost it. I could not stop laughing. That happens way at the end of the video, so you may have missed it, but I couldn't stop laughing. I was like, that is not a syllogism. He said, yeah, it is. Premise 1 is true. Premise 2 is true. I was like, I go outside, can't even have... It's like saying that true or false even applies to that. It's so incredibly dumb. But it's not a premise either. There's no if-then in the structure of your argument here. And so, I see stuff like that all the time. And another real classic one is they can't grasp how, not all of them, but many of them, they can't grasp how rockets work. So they say, yeah, a rocket can't work in space because there's nothing for the the exhaust from the rocket to push against. I'm like, that is not how Newton's laws of motion work. Like, a garden hose flails around, not because the water's pushing against the air, but because there's an equal and opposite reaction. And then stuff like, oh, I can prove the Earth isn't moving because if you go in a helicopter, the Earth doesn't turn underneath you. So there is very clearly a huge amount of the inability to think going on here. Now, I don't think all of them are stupid. Even very smart people have believed in insanely stupid things. Like Lynn Margulis, I think, was an AIDS denier. And I was like, you're one of the most brilliant and pioneering biologists of the 20th century. What do you mean that AIDS doesn't exist? What the hell is the matter with you? And I don't know. I don't know if I can think of another example off the top of my head. But yeah, anybody's capable of believing some nonsense like homeopathy or whatever. Ben Carson, I don't know if you remember who he was, but he ran for president. He's a neurosurgeon, by all accounts, completely brilliant, and he's a young Earth Creationist. And he believes in all kinds of really stupid stuff, too.
You and I might take for granted the fact that we are educated in physics. What I would say about flat earthers, it's kind of like a children's understanding. Of course, some are stupid, but some globe earthers are stupid.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying. So, for example, you and I, we have the background in this. So if some random person just got, like picture a flat earther doing the thing where you stand on the sidewalk, you point a camera and a microphone in somebody's face and you demand an answer. Would the average person be able to explain to you why a helicopter hovering and the Earth not spinning below you isn't really a problem? They would probably, I wouldn't be surprised at all if they said, well, I don't know. I'd have to get back to you on that, or I have no idea. And then they would just be, and then all they would have from that point is, but the Earth isn't flat. That may be the case, but I'm going to now not be charitable to the flat earther because it takes not even 2 minutes to get an understanding of why that completely falls apart. Literally drive in your car and toss a ball up and catch it in your hand. And you've disproven the logic of your claim. Now, either they are spending literally zero time trying to validate what their claim is, because if they tried, they would learn that it's completely bunk. Or they are doing that and they're impervious to the information, which you either got to be insane, brainwashed, stupid, or lying. Those are the only options for this case, and none of them work. Now, typically, I add ignorant to that. To believe the Earth is flat, you either have to be insane, stupid, brainwashed, ignorant, or lying. But we're discussing, well, let's get rid of the ignorance by hypothetically going over the information for their claim. And once we remove ignorance, we're still left with those 4 options, and none of those are good.
You mentioned, you're basically leading me right into my next question, which is about someone who we both had interactions with, Flatzoid.
The Earth's flat and Jesus still loves you.
Yeah. Flatzoid has been one of the guests on my show here, and I've actually been on his live stream a couple of times. You only learned who Flatzoid was about a year ago, because I watched a video of yours about a year ago to where he was reacting to one of yours and you watched him react.
Yeah, that was closer to 2 years ago, but yeah.
You said exactly what you had just said. You said, Flatzoid, I'm not sure if you're insane, you're lying, or just plain dumb. So I ask you now that we're almost 2 years later, you've debated him for over an hour at this point. Does Flatzoid believe the Earth is flat?
I didn't think so before I talked to him. And now I'm at the point where I think he does think that the Earth is flat, but I think he's kind of victimized himself because there's absolutely nothing he ever says at any point that backs up that belief. at all. I mean, he has talking points, but they're also incredibly stupid. And he has been caught like making stuff up before. And he just completely gives up on many things. Like when Will Duffy was asking him, where is the South Pole? And he said 90 degrees. It's like, okay, but in your model, 90 degrees is this enormous circle. So where is it? And all he can say is wherever they put it. You know, he's asking like where the pole, like the actual pole or whatever is. So he can't deal with that question because he knows he can't give an answer because he can't. But I don't know what it is, and I don't know how to describe it, but in discussing with him, I just walked away and I was like, man, he definitely doesn't think the Earth is a sphere, but I can't wrap my head around why. It's kind of like Kent Hovind, but because I do believe that Kent Hovind really does believe in young Earth creationism and that evolution is false. But there have been it's been decades with that moron of people explaining to him why everything he says is complete hogwash. And what I really loved about the first time I debated him was I just got him to admit that he has no idea what the answer is or how to prove what he believes or even give an argument for what he believes. All he can do is just say that he believes it and deny the, traditional secular account. Which is really pathetic that that's all there is left. And that's like Kent's a victim of, I don't know what you would call that, dogmatism or whatever. And I think Flatzoid is too. Whatever, like psychologically, he can't abandon his belief. And so he constructs a reality in front of him in order to work with that worldview, which isn't the same thing as lying. I actually kind of get a note. People say people are lying way too flippantly in the debatosphere where I live. I actually really don't like that because it's not helpful. Because they're actually, being called a liar seems really mundane and like whatever. It sounds like a middle school insult, but it really actually is an attack on the integrity and identity of a person in a way that I think is sort of universally insulting. And I guess I'll just leave it with a quote that gets tossed around a lot. Never attribute to malice what could be explained with incompetence. So I think that's the better option.
Yeah. So many people do accuse him of being a flat out liar and grifter, and I don't think it's that simple. I'm basically with you on this. I'm sure he has his doubts, and he's blocking out anything that might force him to challenge his beliefs. So he just doesn't want to learn anything that would cause him to realize he's wrong, so he just avoids them.
This isn't unique to people that believe in anti-scientific ideas. I mean, you read the psychological literature and it tells you that you can do this with politics. You can give people, and the stats can be real or made up, it doesn't matter. But you bring people in to have a discussion on, for example, like gun reform, and you just give them data that unequivocally proves that whatever they're for or against isn't the case. And they can't read that data objectively. They will say, well, the study is fake, or they will give you an explanation for why the study is flawed, or they will interpret the data to say, oh, well, this actually does prove my point because X, Y, or Z. I think I heard once that when people are like reading, like if you read a prompt or whatever and it's politically charged, your IQ drops by 15 points, which is, I mean, that's probably 2 standard deviations if I had to guess. Well, no, probably not 2. It's about 1. Because isn't it, doesn't everybody falls, because average IQ is technically, I think if you have a 110 IQ, you're still technically in the average. So then it would go between 90 and 110 or whatever. But that would be within 1 standard deviation. But whatever. It's like 1.5 standard deviations probably, which is really massive. And And because what does that mean? It means it's important to think about what that really means. We don't mean like you actually get stupider somehow, like magically, but what's happening is you're given information and your ability to understand and comprehend what that information says is partially destroyed. And so it's reflective, it's reflected in those results. Your IQ goes down when you're trying. It's like driving drunk. You can't do it. You can't be good at it. There's no way.
You been drinking tonight?
Absolutely not. Could you do me a favor? Hold this beer while I back it up.
And yeah, unfortunately, that's just the way we are. And it's, I mean, now I'm kind of changing the subject, but it's why I derive a lot of value in what I do. Some people are like, how can you stand to do this? I'm like, because I think it's really important. And on top of just talking about facts that aren't true and promoting science, I really do my best to also teach and coach while I do this. Here's specifically what's going on here. Here's why this person is making this claim or whatever, so that people can try to be more aware of that, because otherwise it's going to happen to them too.
Once again, you kind of led me into another question I had for you, which was coming up. Who cares if strangers on the internet believe the earth is flat? Why spend countless hours debating it online, writing a book about it or 2 books about it? Are we going to look back in 40 years or in 20 years and be like, why did we waste so much time on such a ridiculous notion? Why are we trying to convince strangers on the internet that they're wrong?
Well, I guess I have a few things to say about this. One is, I have changed my mind about things. I didn't used to think the earth is flat, but I've changed my mind on all kinds of things. I mean, I used to be a religious person back when I believed in evolution and the Big Bang and whatever else. You know, when I was a Christian, I believed in those things still. And I only ever deconstructed and then started, gaining new knowledge, and I think became a more intelligent and person who was motivated to learn more by checking out like old debate clips and reading books and stuff like that. Not books on YouTube, but debate clips on YouTube and lots of YouTube videos, and then reading books written by those people and by others. And I get a lot of feedback from people saying, I've learned a lot from your channel. Because even somebody that believes in, all the science or whatever that I talk about, they might not know why. It's like that example we were talking about earlier. No, the earth isn't flat. Okay, how would you prove that? Well, I have no idea how I would prove it isn't flat, but we just know that it isn't flat. Well, that should be good enough. and it really is good enough, I would say. But there's always, we can do better, and there's always more to learn. So there's that aspect of it. The other aspect of it is, if this is really, let me give an analogy by way of people talking about voter apathy, why vote? It doesn't matter. It's okay, if that's true, then it's universally true, and that means that nobody should vote. Well, what the hell is going to happen to us if nobody votes? Then a bunch of psychopaths and oligarchs and whatever are just going to control the entire system, and then it would be so much vastly worse than it is. So imagine how bad it is. It could be a lot worse. So if we don't discuss ideas, even insanely stupid ideas, out in the public sphere, or if we just commit ourselves to the idea that it's not going to make a difference, then let's just all stop having discourse about things we disagree in. And what do you think is going to happen if we do that? Things are going to get worse, because people that agree with each other will talk about it, and then they'll go into their spaces and without any pushback, peddle it's positive feedback, echo chamber, other figures of speech. That's ultimately what's going to happen. So
it's really hard to quantify the impact that all of the debunkers online have had, right?
It's impossible. Yeah.
Sometimes I do, of course, we have the final experiment, and Will has some list of people or some number in his mind how many people he's converted back to globe earthers and broken the spell of flat Earth. But the impact has to be greater than that, right? And so I wonder, if it wasn't for any of the debunkers pushing back on these ideas online, how big would flat Earth be?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it would. I feel like it would be worse, probably. I was having a conversation with a friend, not quite a year ago, but close to that, and he knows what I do, and he thinks what I do is cool and funny or whatever. But he's got some conspiracies. He doesn't think the Earth is flat or anything like that. But he said to me, the one that gets me, I don't think we went to the moon. And I was like, oh, really? And then I asked him why he thinks that. And we didn't talk about too much, but one of the things he said was, well, how come we aren't still doing it? And SpaceX or whatever did it. And we haven't got, it was something along those lines. And I said to him, I was like, oh, okay, well, here's if we went, why wouldn't we be doing it like commercially today or whatever? And I said, okay, well, what you have to understand is when they were first doing during the Gemini and Apollo missions, there was an incredible fatality rate. I don't remember what the exact number is, but if commercial flight today had a failure rate that we had like during the Apollo years and Gemini and Apollo years, we would be seeing like multiple hundreds of crashes every single day, which nobody would possibly tolerate. And I said, look, a government can do that because they're not trying to make money. PR is important, but at the end of the day, think about, and a lot of those guys were experimental pilots in the military. They go out and they test the absolute craziest shit out there because we're trying to be leaders and we're at the forefront of what we can and can't do. So they can tolerate that and they can put up with the loss of money, the loss of life, etc. that goes along with it. And it was more nuanced than that, but I don't remember everything we talked about. And I said that, and he said, yeah, okay, that actually does make perfect sense. Now, I haven't talked to him I've only talked to him a couple times since then. And guess what? Maybe a couple weeks ago on Facebook, he shared this big long thing about, we never went to the moon. I guarantee it. And here are all the reasons why. And I was like, if we just talked regularly, I guarantee you would not be saying this shit because there's nobody to tell him why all of that's wrong.
That's one thing I've never heard you debate, actually. Have you ever debated the moon landing?
No, because it's so incredibly niche. The crap you have to know to push against that is it. I am not going to get sucked down that rabbit hole because they'll give you the name of somebody you've never heard of and a memoir they wrote that you've never heard of and 7 claims you've never heard of. And they're like, well, so-and-so in blah, blah, blah said this, that, and the other thing. And did you know that they didn't even have a whatever blank, blank, blank on the lunar? It's like, okay, you vomited 10 things and I've never heard of any of them before. So I don't know what to say to you. That's because you're a dumbass globe believer and you worship the government. It's like, no. So early on, I kind of did because there are some fairly I'll just give you one example. There's uninterrupted footage of the Apollo lander moving over the surface of the moon, and it goes on for several minutes, and then the camera rotates, or the module or whatever rotates, and then it points out into space. And Corridor Crew, which is a great YouTube channel, they went over this. They did some moon debunking stuff, and they said, look, to fake that, you'd have to have, it would be a miniature model, but it would still have to be incredibly big, hundreds of yards long probably, because the footage goes on for so long. But then when it tilts,
back then,
yeah, but then when it tilts up and it points to a completely black sky, a point from the sun. Then they said, okay, this thing just got 10 billion times more impossible to fake because you can't artificially light that with one light source. It's just not possible. And so, the simplest explanation actually is that we went to the moon and didn't fake it, because all the fakery is so much more absurd than the real thing. But, then there's also like, we left reflectors up there, and we send light out and we bounce it back, and you can read the data. I have a friend who's personally been there when they do that before. And you can see the landing site with, not really with a telescope, but with satellites that are on the moon. We've seen it. So
moon landing is similar to flat Earth in a way, to where there's all these arguments that they all say the same thing, and there's a list of them somewhere probably, and you have to learn the proper response to each one. It's not something most people just know off the top of their head.
Yeah,
things like, why haven't we gone back? Well, I didn't realize, but we actually have gone back 6 times.
There were 7 missions. There should have been 8, but 13 had to go back. And they had plans for more, but I mean, it was a financial black hole, and it was a military exercise. I mean, I write about this in Facts That Aren't True, and several places in there I say, well, the only reason anybody ever does anything is because of war and money. Those are the only 2 reasons why anything is ever done. And yeah, I mean, the moon landing, it was an exercise in military might, kind of. I mean, I do believe that John F. Kennedy was the kind of person to also believe in the naked pursuit of truth. That's just what I think about him, I guess. But so, I believe his speech. But at the same time, it was just, it was a military exercise also. 2 things can be true.
I'll bring it back to something you mentioned a little bit before we went off on the moon landing tangent. You mentioned religion and the fact that you were religious. You grew up Catholic, I believe. I've never heard you talk about why you walked away from religion, so I want to ask you about that. And I want to ask you about how much you believed when you were Catholic. Did you believe in all the impossible miracles, the virgin birth, the resurrection, the Noah's Ark? I think I know the answer to some of that, but those listening won't. So let me know about that. And what age were you, and what made you call it quits and declare yourself an atheist?
Sure. So I don't ever remember as a kid thinking that, like, the flood, I never believed that happened. And as far as Adam and Eve, I don't think I really ever believed that. But I also can't ever remember a point in my life until I was in my 20s where I actually said to myself, wait, is this true or not? Like, it was just like, it was part of the story, and I didn't think, it never crossed my mind to say to accept it or reject it. It was just like, okay, I'm just listening to the story. But yeah, I think, I believed that the Exodus happened because I had a very poor understanding of the story. Cause like, a group of people, like I didn't believe in the plagues, but I believed that like the Exodus happened. And then when I got older, like you look at the numbers and the fact that there's literally 0 supporting archaeological evidence for it. And then it's like, well, that's pretty devastating. But none of that ever affected or influenced the way I thought, the way I accepted myself as a Christian. But I never at any point like asked myself or made myself think about, is it true that Jesus died and was resurrected? Because I remember having arguments with, like, I've pretty much always been a left-leaning person. And I remember in 2014, when that Supreme Court ruling that made blocking gay marriage federally illegal or whatever, like it federally accepted same-sex marriage. I remember when that came out, and I was like trolling my Facebook friends about it, like, haha, looks like we win, or something like that. And I remember people I was friends with saying like, no, Adam and Eve were married, and so marriage is a man and a woman. And I remember I chose to bite my tongue, but I do very specifically remember thinking to myself, that's a fictional story. How is that your argument? But at that exact same time, I remember this was 2014. It was right before I became a teacher. I don't even remember what the hell it was about, but I got into this extremely long Facebook comment argument with an atheist, and he was being a complete douchebag, like holier than thou, unironically as an atheist. And I just kept saying to the guy, like, and he actually insulted me. He's like, oh man, and you're a science teacher and you believe this stuff or whatever. And I just remember, like, you think you're so smart because of what you don't believe, and it doesn't work that way. And I still basically feel that way, But so yeah, I at the same time was saying this part of the Bible is fiction, but this part of the Bible is not fiction. And what started happening, my deconstruction journey or whatever, started happening like right at that same time, like kind of 2014, 2015, when a little bit of it started happening at the end of college too, when I just started to realize what other people who are Christians believe. And I started thinking to myself, if this is Christianity, then I'm not one. Like the rampant homophobia and xenophobia and things like that. And like this idea, I remember sitting on I did college in track. I remember sitting on the bus coming home from track meets. I don't know why we were having these religious conversations, but this guy who I had like the utmost respect for, loved him as a friend. I still do respect the guy, but man, but we were on the bus and he said, I don't remember what he said, but I remember extrapolating the logic of what he said. And I said, if you think that, then you think that Jews go to hell. And he just looked at me and was like, yeah, they do. And I was like, what? I was like, how can you say that? And so, yeah, so stuff like that. And like when Trump got into office, was running, not even before, it was before he even got elected, but when he was running, I was looking online for let's shit on Donald Trump kind of content. And that inevitably led me to Bill Maher, who I'm really not much of a fan of at all anymore. But Bill Maher, and so I started watching him talk about Trump, but then other clips of Bill Maher would pop up. And his movie Religulous, I watched that, and that was really close to the final nail in the coffin. Perhaps the single idea that really spelled the end for me was, if Adam and Eve never existed, then there never was any original sin, and there was completely no point in Jesus ever existing. And that was the very first time I really ever remember saying to myself, is the story of Jesus true? I just always heard the story and I was like, yep, okay, this is what I believe in. Because that's just the nature of, like, my indoctrination was a completely passive indoctrination. It was like technically making it mandatory that children go to school and receive an education is technically indoctrination, but it's passive indoctrination, if that actually makes any sense. And that's what my my personal religion was for me. And that when I started critically thinking about it, I just realized to myself, I have no better reason to believe this stuff than anybody who believes in anything has to believe. And so I sat around I probably sat around for a year before I even privately to myself convinced myself that I'm an atheist. And then I don't think I told anybody for like a year, because I was pretty scared I was just worried of being ostracized for it, because especially where I'm from, that's just kind of like people would be like, did you hear that Eric's an atheist? And so like, so you don't get invited to things anymore. I really wish I was making that up.
You were in the closet. You were a closet atheist.
Yeah, basically. Man, I got to tell you, like 3 years ago, or was that 2 years ago? Yeah, it was like 2 years ago. I was talking to some of my students, and I don't know why this got brought up. I think we were talking about evolution, and I was like, look, guys, I don't want you to think that this is like an either or kind of thing. Like it is not the case that if evolution is true, then God doesn't exist, because I want them to learn the science, and you can believe in both. And I just like in passing said like, look, I don't even believe in God, and then like I tried to like finish my sentence, and the look on so many of their faces, like I remember, and one of my students, oh no, actually this was different. I don't remember. There were some things that were said that were hilarious, but I want this will be the end of my story here real quick. But yeah, about 2 years ago, a friend of mine outed me to his little nieces and nephews, who like they were all like 5, 6, 7 years old or something like that. And yeah, my friend goes, well, Eric, he doesn't believe in God. And I was kind of like, why the hell would you say that? But at the same time, it's like, why would I care what 5, 6, 7-year-olds say? But one of them literally, he like
Did
he got
think you're going
mad
to hell
at me.
now and got upset or what?
No, he said, Eric, what's wrong with you? He either said, what's wrong with you, or stop that. I can't remember which one it was, but it was so funny. Like the way that they're just like, you can't do that. You know?
It's amazing. Yeah. Even at that age, it's already been indoctrinated. One of the other subjects in your book was young Earth creationism. Mm-hmm. You weren't a young Earth creationist, were you?
No, never. I remember being a really little kid, and my best friend across the street, Philip Smith, he and I would play like make-believe dinosaurs quite a lot. We had a lot of dinosaur toys and like toy guns. We'd pretend to like go blast some dinosaurs or whatever. But I remember, I even remember where we were. We were in his yard, and he said, yeah, humans and dinosaurs lived together less than 10,000 years ago. And I remember, I was probably 7 or something like that. I remember looking at him and just saying like, dinosaurs died 65 million years ago. What are you talking about? And he just basically said, nuh-uh. And I think he said they told him that at church. And I have no idea. I think I just like was like, oh, let's just fucking move on.
But I was confused.
No, yeah, when he said that, I was like, why would you say that?
So confused if you haven't heard of it. Yeah. I've been asking people lately, especially with it being more and more spoken about, that Will Duffy is a young Earth creationist, right? At the time I spoke with him, one of my questions to him, this is before they left for the trip, was I did like kind of rapid fire questions at the end, and one of them was, how old is the Earth? And he said less than 10,000 years old. And
man, that's wild.
It wasn't the time or place to question him on that, so I immediately moved on. But now he's been talking about it more and more, now that the final experiment's kind of concluded. It is amazing to me that he can believe that, while obviously being in the realm of, at least when it comes to challenging flat Earth, completely logical and reasonable. But I've been asking people even before then, which is more ridiculous? And I asked him in a super chat when he was on Katz's stream the other day, which is more ridiculous, thinking the Earth is flat or that the Earth is only 6,000 or 10,000 years old? What do you think is more ridiculous?
I guess I would have to say that flat Earth is, if I had to pick one. I typically say that thinking the Earth is 6,000 years old is as stupid as thinking it's flat. I guess I would say it's as wrong, probably not as stupid, because you can prove without doing science that the Earth can't possibly be flat. You can't technically actually do that with the age of the Earth. You kind of just have to accept, and I have no idea if Duffy rejects that, because, flat earthers are conspiracy theorists. A lot of creationists are conspiracy theorists. They're lying about the radiometric dating, or they have their alternative theory for why we can see billions of light years. No, we don't actually see billions of light years. It's because of whatever. Duffy, if I had to guess, just believes that God miraculously created the universe and looking like it does, and it really is as big as it is. And the light was just miraculously brought to Earth from the farthest reaches in the cosmos in those first 6 days of creation, or whatever. I would guess that's what Duffy thinks.
I can speak to that because that is basically what he believes. He said this just recently, that he believes that God created, yes, the universe is huge and they're billions of light years away, and he just doesn't see why, if God can create everything, why he couldn't create the starlight right next to Earth. So we'd see it immediately.
Yeah, and so what I would be interested in then is with Duffy, it's like, okay, Duffy, what would it take for you to believe that it's not less than 10,000 years old? And his answer is going to be, I'm a Christian, and so I know that the Earth is less than 10,000 years. And it's like, this is the same logic of the flat earther. And so it's odd. Now, again, you can prove that the Earth is not flat really without doing hardly any science. So, I mean, the position you take on the claim, I think, is equally dogmatic and rash and stupid. But at least the young Earth creationist can technically, on their own accord, prove that the Earth isn't flat. So I don't know. I don't have any real sympathy or whatever for the young Earth creationist in this. So it would be interesting though. What would the final experiment look like for Duffy? And like the fact that if he would never accept it, then it's like I need to hear from him why what he's saying is different than the flat earthers. Because at the end of the day, the flat earther will just say, and they have been saying that that 24-hour sun, that was just Satan putting a light in the sky to trick you.
I heard Dean Odell say that after the experiment. We might find out what it'll take for Will to change his mind. He just happened to announce on Katz's stream the other day he's going to be doing something similar to the final experiment to get to the truth of how old the Earth is. At least I believe that's the premise.
That was on Conspiracy Katz's live stream?
Yeah, Culture Cats now. But let's leave that there. Let's move on to another topic. I say recently, it's been over a month now, but I was at DebateCon 5, and Andrew Wilson was there. You recently debated Andrew Wilson. Leading up to your debate with him, you said you had a strategy going in, and you wouldn't reveal it because you didn't want to give anything away. What was your strategy?
So the topic of our debate was Christianity shouldn't be in government. That was the subject line or the prompt or whatever. So my general plan for the debate was to prove that Andrew Wilson doesn't believe that. And what I did through the debate was I gave quotes from the Bible and from Christian theologians and from present-day Christians saying things that I know are not part of Andrew Wilson's politics. So whatever it is, and this is a tactic you can use with any Christian nationalist or whatever. So the tactic was to prove that according to Andrew Wilson doesn't want these ideas in government, but these ideas are Christian ideas, meaning that whatever it is you think should happen or change, you are drawing inspiration on it from somewhere else, and the Bible and Christianity is not the source of it. And what I also did was I also looked at the problem would be well, Andrew, I know that you're Orthodox, and so what if we become a Catholic? Or what if Catholicism becomes the brand of Christianity that has been adopted by the U.S. government or whatever. Now all of a sudden you're subject to the Pope, and you reject that. So even if you win this debate, or well, not even the debate, but like even if you get what you want, you don't get what you want potentially out of this. That was the general strategy, and I think it was. I did also have, we didn't really have time to talk about it, but I did have a lot of figures showing that the more religious states are the more dysfunctional ones. Andrew is huge on like sexual immorality and whatever. And I was like, okay, well, the heaviest porn users, the most STD ridden, the most pregnant as teenager, etc. People in this country live in the most religious states. So why if we've seen this in practice play out, why would you think that bringing that into government would have any other kind of effect? And other things like suicide and low life expectancy, and obesity rates and stuff like that correlate with all of that as well. So I had stuff on that. It just didn't get talked about very much. I think that was the correct strategy. I wish what people have been saying is, I mean, most of the feedback has been positive, saying that it went really well. But there have been people that are like generally probably on my side that said they thought the debate really wasn't much, or that I lost or whatever. A lot of that is centered around, they think that the prompt was so vague that nobody could win or lose the debate necessarily, unless they just like rage quitted or got pissed off or just didn't have anything interesting to say. So it was kind of like it was set up to fail, and it's like, well, that's not my problem, whatever. But I guess what I wish I would have done a little bit differently is, like, I laid out all my questions with him, and it was kind of excruciating, and it went kind of slow. I wish I would have gone through that faster during my cross-examination, because we could have talked about more, and I think I could have done a better job of sort of controlling the narrative.
DebateCon 6 this fall. I think it's going to be October, and it's in Nashville. The exact date is still to be determined, but what would it take for you to go out and either participate or just come to watch?
There would have to be a science-related topic. I don't feel like doing politics. I do like politics, and I think it's important. I kind of just try to keep it to myself, because like the way that people can just lie about shit in politics is really aggravating, and I don't want to be on the receiving end of somebody just made a bunch of claims about the economy that are completely false, but they steamrolled a million of them on you and you've never heard of any of them before. So you just like capitulate to it or whatever.
But isn't it one day of politics and one day of religion, more or less?
I haven't looked into it, and the religion stuff interests me, I guess. I'd rather talk about science, but whatever. It would depend on the prompts. I wouldn't be interested in some just mind-numbingly god-awful debate like, is atheism justified? Where, like, I could see myself talking about that, but if the opposition is just going to be somebody running some presuppositionalist, transcendental, dumbass argument, then I wouldn't be. Although maybe I would bring my Spanky and show that everybody once and for all how stupid and utterly useless this worldview is. Maybe that actually would be worth it. So it would have to be the right kind of prompt, and it would probably have to be travel, at least, would have to be paid for.
Yeah, I know that James paid for the hotel for all of the guests. I don't actually know if he paid for the travel or not.
Well, okay, if I could get one but not the other, then I could see myself doing it. It's like, as far as like a business decision, it's a complete no-brainer.
Yeah, I would love to see you at DebateCon one of these days.
He did email me a while back, but he just asked where I live, and he like brought it up. I was like, oh no, I'm in California, so if you guys are ever do it in San Diego or whatever, then hit me up. And he said he would.
Eric, I made a game specifically for our conversation today. I am not very creative when it comes to thinking of names, but I called it canon or fiction. So what's going to happen is you're going to see 3 quotes on the left-hand side and 3 possible sources on the right-hand side. Now, one of the quotes will always be a Bible verse or a pair of Bible verses. And the other 2 will be, one of them will be made up completely either by me or ChatGPT. The last one will be a quote from a popular science fiction novel. Your job is going to be to match one with its source. Let's see how well you know the Bible.
All right, let's check it out. And in the darkest of nights, the Lord gave his command, let the blood of the unfaithful run like rivers, and may their cries be lost at night. That sounds prophetic, and it says Lord, so I'm going with 1 Samuel. Wow. Okay.
What are the other choices here? We have A Song of Ice and Fire and ChatGPT. So that was one of those 2.
Wow. I'm going to say, why would they say Lord in A Song of Ice and Fire? I'm going to go with ChatGPT. Okay.
That was good. That was good reasoning right there. Yeah.
But do not spare them, kill both. Okay, if I would have read that first, I would have known that that was the Bible. So do not spare them, kill both man and woman, child and infant, ox and sheep, cattle and camel and donkey. That is the Bible. I know that verse, I just didn't have the book memorized. Well, we know that this is going to be that. So it was in the court of the wicked king that the fool was crowned in jest, and all men laughed, not knowing the jest was upon them. So there we have it. All right, so I got to read all 3 before guessing. There she lusted after her lovers, whose genitals were like those of donkeys and whose emissions were like that of horses. That sounds like George R.R. Martin, but I actually know that is from the Bible. So this is why the Bible should be banned in schools, because the Bible is porn, everybody. Do not pity the dead, pity the living, and above all, those who live without love. That could be Harry Potter. What's the other one? He who eats shall not be satisfied. He who drinks shall remain thirsty. He who lies shall find no rest. That sounds like the Bible, but I'm pretty sure that's you. So, yep, the whole point of...
Yeah, that was in fact me trying to trick you into thinking it was the Bible.
Yeah, the whole point of Harry Potter was friendship. Friendship is the key, so... the rivers ran dry, and the people cried for mercy, yet their pleas fell upon deaf ears, for the Lord had commanded them to drink their own urine. Wow, that could be from the Bible. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. That sounds like nonsense. When the Lord saw this, he said, I will spread dung on your faces, the dung of your offering, and you will be taken away with it. That, something like that is in the Bible. The top one sounds more like the Bible, but I'm actually going with the dung. Oh, what the heck? Yes!
Good
I got that
job.
right.
Well done.
So then, I'm pretty sure this would be ChatGPT. And swinging swords, that's Game of Thrones. Okay.
Now you should know, you might already have been able to tell, but my prompt for ChatGPT was, of course, to make up Bible verses or these quotes that sound like they could be part of the style of the Old Testament in most cases.
All right. The blood of the arrogant shall water the fields they refused to till, and their families shall starve at the hand of the Lord. That sounds biblical, but 2 Kings I don't think is about, it doesn't have that kind of rhetoric in it. A silver crown upon his brow, yet his heart was darkened with shadows. He walked the halls of men as a king, yet bore the soul of a beggar. That sounds like Lord of the Rings. And the Lord sent bears, and they came from the woods and mauled 42 of the young boys. Okay, well, I actually just uploaded a video about this recently that is in 2 Kings. The blood of the arrogant. Well, that sounds like you. There we go. And Lord of the Rings.
Well done. Well done.
All right, next. What is dead may never die, but rises again harder and stronger. I want to say that that's you, but we're going to wait. A time will come when men will cry out to the rocks, fall on us, and to the hills cover us, yet they shall not escape their doom. That sounds like a pre-battle hype speech. The angels shall weep as the Lord shall remember the names of those who have sinned, for he does not forget. I'm going to say that that's Luke. No? Okay, so then the first one is Luke. Wow.
Wow.
Huh. That I would not have expected that. Now I'm really... What is dead may never rise, but the angel shall... So I don't think in Game of Thrones they talk about... Okay.
There you go.
You know what's funny? I've only ever watched 3 episodes of Game of Thrones, and it was the last 3 episodes.
Oh, the worst 3 then.
Yeah, that's what everybody says. You think the dead we loved ever truly leave us? You think that we don't recall them more clearly than ever in times of great trouble? Wow, that sounds like some Harry Potter stuff. Happy is the one who seizes your infants and dashes them against the rocks. I know that's in the Bible. I wouldn't have remembered that it's specifically in the Psalms. And after the battle, the crows feasted upon the men as they sang a song of death for the Lord. Well, that's you, because Harry Potter's not that PG-13.
Yeah, you always know me and ChatGPT are always trying to make it sound like a Bible verse. It was a little bit tougher. Good job, though. It was a little bit tougher to find fictional quotes from those books that actually sounded just like Bible verses. So how are you so familiar with the Bible? Have you read it cover to cover?
Not cover to cover. No, I really want to. I'm actually a pretty bad reader. More so, I'm a bad attention keeper. I don't know what the word is for that. Reading's always not been real great for me, though. But when it's something I'm really interested in, then I can't put it down. And I don't know, the Bible, like there's a lot of the Bible that isn't all that interesting, but I do want to read it a couple of times at some point, cover to cover for sure at some point. And then like really study it, but that's such a long process, unfortunately.
Before we go, is there anything you'd like to share, what's new and up and coming on your channel, which of course will be in the description below?
I don't have any like big like projects or anything I've been working on coming up. Just kind of more of the same thing. So find me on YouTube at Planet Peterson. I'm on TikTok and Instagram too. I don't do a ton on those platforms, but I do farm content for YouTube on TikTok. So if you want to see the debates before they get posted and be there when it happens, you'll find me on TikTok, I suppose. My 2 books are out, so there's links for those in all the descriptions of my videos on YouTube that you can check out, or just go to bookbaby.com and then search me up, or just search the names of the titles with my name, and Google will direct you to someplace where you can buy it.
Check out those books. Links will be in the description below. I've kept you for almost 2 hours. I really appreciate the time. It's been great talking with you. Who knows, maybe we could pick up this conversation and cover some of those other topics another time.
Oh yeah, sure thing. Thank you.